So, afternoon and welcome everyone to the fourth session in the week-long webinar series organised by myself, Layli Uddin, a Lever Hume Early Career Fellow at King's College London, and Simon Wolfgang Fuchs, lecturer in Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies at Freiburg University. Today's session is focused on Egypt and Bangladesh, and I'm delighted to introduce our two speakers, Abantee Harun, who is an assistant professor at the University of Liberal Arts, Bangladesh. Her areas of research are the anthropology of Islam, youth, as well as the study of nationalism and ethnicity. She's published a number of articles, research works, and a book, currently under the auspices of the Gerda Henkel Foundation. Abantee has been working on a research project titled Untypical Utopias, Vision of the Future from Adolescence at Islamic Schools in Bangladesh and Italy. And this is a research project that's being done jointly with the Department of Social and Cultural Sciences at the Freiburg University of Applied Sciences, Germany, where she is a research associate. The second speaker is Manfred Sing, who's an associated senior researcher at the Leibniz Institute of European History in Germany. He received his doctoral degree in Islamic Studies from Freiburg University. His research interests focus on the multi-religious history of Islam, on secularism and Arab Marxism in a transnational and transcultural perspective. In a research project funded by the German Research Foundation from 2008 to 2012, he worked on post-communist transformations in Arab countries. He has published extensively on Arab Marxism. Most recently, his article, The Tempestuous Affair Between Marxism and Islam, Attraction, Hostility and Accommodation Since 1917, was published in Dietrich Hendrick's book, Muslims and Capitalism, An Easy Relationship. So thank you. Abantee, can you kick us off?
Thank you. Thank you, Layli and Simon, for organizing this webinar and also giving us the opportunity to be introduced to some fascinating ideas and the illuminating thoughts. That was quite engaging. At this last 3 days was really, really engaging. So today I will be presenting. Could you see the PowerPoint? So today I'll be presenting on the life of an Islamic socialist in Bangladesh. As Layli has already told, I have been engaged in a study on Islam, politics and youth movements in general, and with particular focus on madrasa education. So while I was conducting the research, I found some noticeable gaps in the current forms of historiography and other scholarly works where secular liberal forces, including the nationalist as well as the socialist and socialist forces, are diametrically opposed with the religious forces. While describing the history of Bangladesh, which I found to be quite noticeable and important. And this drew my attention as because coming of age in the 80s and 90s, I understand that is a partial and fragmented reading of the history, where many other diversities and points of convergence and collaboration are missing in such narratives. So I propose that a thorough genealogy might help us understand the current debates, conflicts, and convergence on Islam and socialism. For the last 3 days, we had been through many illuminating presentations and discussions on Islam and socialism, theoretical clarifications, debate, and debate. So I'm not getting into those debates once again. Rather, I would like to look at the actions and political movements that happen in Bangladesh. And following the work of cultural theorists Stuart Hall and drawing from the political theories of Ernesto Laclau and Judith Butler, I look at Islam as a name for different ways in which concrete subjects are positioned and position themselves within the narratives of the past in social contexts constituted by inequalities and power asymmetries.
Abantee, sorry,
yes.
Could I stop you there? There's some strange reverberations happening on with the, is it the fan that's going on, or it's fine now? Oh, is there a fan that's going on in the room, or there's something?
Do you hear now properly?
Yes, kind of. Yeah, it's fine. Okay.
Sure.
And if you want to go full screen on your PowerPoint, that would be great.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, great.
Okay. So, oh, I think this should go. Okay.
Okay, sure.
As I was saying, that drawing from the political theories of Ernesto Laclau and Judith Butler, I look at Islam as a name for different ways in which concrete subjects are positioned, and they position themselves within the narratives of the past in social context constituted by inequalities and power asymmetries. And same would be applied to socialism. I don't commence with preconceived definitions of terms such as Islam, religion, or socialism, as these words cannot operate outside of the socio-political context. Instead, I would be interested to look at when are these terms being used by whom, with what interest, against which other ways of using them, and what actions have been taken in applying these terms, and what are the points of convergence. I understand that there are many participants here from Bangladesh, but still I would give you a brief introduction on Bangladesh, very brief, I think. So Bangladesh is a country of South Asia and dominated by mostly Muslim majority. And it became independent in 1971 through a civil war from Pakistan, was because it was the eastern wing of Pakistan. Pakistan was formed on the basis of religious nationalism during the partition of India in 1947, and another basis was the Muslim majority population of this part. So at this moment in Bangladesh, while Bangladesh was formed in 1971, secularism was taken as one of the four major principles in the 1972 Constitution. But later on, the Islam and Islamic ideals were replaced through consecutive amendments in Bangladesh. In the politics, mainly the nationalist force dominate, while the ruling party, League, is portrayed as a secular one, and the BNP is seen as the ally of the Islamist forces. But both parties have their Islamist and socialist alliances. And of course, there are several factions of Islamist parties and socialist parties, mostly on the basis of theoretical disagreement and leadership issues. So I'm not going to the discussion of Islam, how it has been, how it played a crucial role in the formation of Bengali Muslim community. There are quite important discussions by many scholars like Peter Batucci or Richard Eaton, and recently Iftikhar Iqbal. They had shed light on different forms of the Muslim society formation in Bangladesh. Rather, I would like to look at how the Marxist or socialist movement started in Bengal, or also in British colonial during the British colonial rule. So during the time of nationalist movements against the British colonial rule, the Communist Party of India was founded in Tashkent in 1920. If you have a look at the founding members of the party, there were significant Muslim representation like Muhammad Ali, Ahmed Hassan, who was later named as Ahmed Hassan, Muhammad Shafiq Siddiqui, and others. Even the smallest segment in Bengal started, that was led by Muzaffar Ahmed from Chittagong. And also some in other parts, like in the United Province or in Punjab, that was led by the Muslim leaders. So it seems that the introduction of the Marxist ideology and the introduction of Socialist Party in India paved the way for the Muslim population who were hesitant and apprehensive in joining the anti-British movement, either in Congress or Swadeshi movement or even the Muslim League. And the establishment of the CPI helped channelize the anti-imperialist sentiments and make them acquire a sharper and more focused pro-nationalist and also socialist sentiment. But it is also important to mention that even before the introduction of Marxist social ideology or socialism, there was the existence of radical or progressive movement for social change in this part of the world. In fact, the first rebellion against the British colonial rule started in the form of, political not in the form of political rebellion, but also in the form of religious rebellion. Fakir and Sannyasi rebellion, both were led by Muslim and Hindu sages. And there are historical records of secular movements in the form of uprising of the peasants or the rebellion of the indigenous people at the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857, and also various reformist movements that include social reforms under Haji Shariatullah, who called on for religious reform among the Muslims. So, socialism gave the Muslims the courage of their convictions to speak up, who were either hesitant or reluctant to join the nationalist movements, where they found there a little space for them in Congress that was led by the elite Hindus or Hindu Bhadraloks, whereas the Muslim League was led by the Muslim elites. So once again, I would like to look at the point that neither Islam nor Muslims were a homogeneous category even at that time. Although the Muslim majority population of the subcontinent are Sunni Muslims, there exists substantial portion of Shia population and other sects. In addition to the small group of landlords and emerging bourgeoisie, there were also Muslim middle class and also majority population were peasants. But most importantly, the population was and is divided in terms of doctrinal affiliation and practice. There are many tariqas, even in Bengal, like the Wahhabis, Barelvis, and of course many other Sufi traditions. And nevertheless, these divisions are not limited into their belief and practice of piety, but they are also extended up to social and political activism. Often the Sufis are portrayed as the most influential figures in a scholarly literature, but the ulama, I mean the religious, Muslim religious scholars who also had a strong role to create and influence public psyche. Well, in most cases, the Sufi and ulama are not separate entities as it is depicted by the Western scholars like Hans Kellner or Theodor Pierce. So, however, during the late 19th century, the ulama cum Sufis played a significant role in mobilizing their fan bases through preaching, literature, journalism, and other forms of political activism. And this,
Abantee,
yes.
Is there a fan that's going on in the room?
No.
Oh, there isn't. Because I was just there's a strange reverberation, and I can't seem to hear you properly. But if there's no fan going on in the room, that's fine. I don't know what it is.
Generator is going on. So should I try to close the window, maybe?
Yeah, that'd be good.
Could you hear me now?
Yes, that's better. That's better.
Okay. So as I was saying, the ulama cum Sufis, jointly or separately, separate entities, they played a significant role in mobilizing their fan bases, and their look, their views and connections were pan-Indian and also international. Therefore, there are local figures like Maniruddin Islamabadi to Maulana Akram Khan, and also national figures like Syed Hussain Madani, Ubaidullah Sindhi, Jamaluddin Afghani, Maulana Azad Subhani. All this became familiar names among the Muslim middle class and educated groups. And of course, they had their different agenda, like pan-Islamism, the development of Muslim societies, purification. And even during the Pakistan movement, the ulama had a sharp division on the basis of supporting Pakistan movement or remaining in India. So the first generation of the communists were recruited from the activists from nationalist socialist movement and also from other parts of the community. They were kind of accustomed with their methods of politics and working in secret organizational activities. So as such, during the partition and after that, their activities were kind of very limited, mainly through organizing trade union movements and cultural activities. And they had, often it is said that they failed to make their mark and stake their claim in the nationalistic movement that led to the creation of India and then Pakistan. However, the Muslims who, so when the Pakistan was formed, the communists had their activities, but initially it was very limited. But during the Pakistan period, at the height of Muslim nationalism, the Communist Party became a source of activism for Bengali Muslims in many ways, as the Bengal Muslims got disillusioned about their dream of Pakistan. So they had to find their new forms of activism, new idioms, and new forms of expression. And amidst the huge popularity of linguistic nationalism, there was a secular and progressive, that was secular and progressive in nature. The socialist ideas was getting popular among the literate middle class urban population. Uh, However, for the masses, it was still an alien idea, except the immense popularity and influence of Maulana Abdul Hamid Khan Bhashani. So, as Layli is here, I'm not getting into that issue because she had worked extensively with Bhashani and she is an expert on this. However, by this time, there were many divisions among the communist groups. There were many, like pro-Moscow, pro-Marxist-Leninist, and pro-Chinese divisions. So most of these groups had contributed to the organization and mobilization of liberation movement that eventually led to the independent war. Only a little fragment rejected the war, but however, once again, they failed to make their contribution recognized to the masses, even during the independence war. But in the post-war situation, where people were frustrated with their shattered dreams, they could find the sympathetic chord among the masses and youths. There was a growing frustration and agitation among a large section of the communists as well as the nationalists in the post-1971 period. And they broke away, a segment broke away from Chhatra League and Awami League, and an underground oppositional movement started. Also, some leftist parties joined, leftist people joined there. The party, Jatiyo Samajtantrik Dal, that is the National Socialist Party, was formed, and their major ideology was scientific socialism. And many went for the underground mass movements. Also, sometimes it is armed. In their leadership, they were retired generals of the war who claimed to have the leftist ideology. There were many, as I said, there were many people who came from Chhatra League and Awami League, and many other disillusioned young men of the 1970s. So at that time, let's have a look. This is the first representation of the Muslim leaders during the formation of the Communist Party. And this is Maulana Abdul Hamid Khan Bhashani. So at that time, during the 70s, if we are to look at it, we could see there are three major trends of Islam and socialists who were trying to converge Islam and socialism ideas. One was led by Maulana Bhashani, but at that time it was kind of dismantled. It lost its glory as it had during the 50s and the 60s. And also another segment that broke away from Maulana Bhashani's pro-Chinese lobby, that was led by Professor Muzaffar Ahmed, Dharma Karma Samajtantra, and another segment that is Islamic Socialism, led by Major Jalil and others who left JSD or Jatiyo Samajtantrik Dal. Who are those people? Because after several attempts and failed coup and revolutions, many thousands were imprisoned, killed, and many were killed. The party got dismantled and many joined the mainstream political party, mainly the ruling party of that time, BNP. Only a smaller segment who sought refuge in Islamic socialism. So I'm currently conducting my study on this tiny part of the people who came from left background and sought their refuge in Islamic socialism, and who were somehow deleted from the mainstream history, as it is said that they were utopianists, they were adventurists, or they were deviated, derailed people, both by the left and by the socialists, by the Islamists. So who were they? What was the situation at that time? So it was the time of the revolution of Iran, and it was the time of the rise of Palestine war. It was the time of Naxalite movement, and they were disillusioned youths who were frustrated with the national and world order that led them to revolution, but they failed. So the Cold War situation also made them frustrated, and many others found that the Soviet state emerged also as an imperialist power. I could show you one of the writing by Major Jalil, where he was saying that the world capitalist system and also the socialist system, the way it has been grown, are almost behaving in the same manner. So they sought to build new alliances. It was the time of, as it was a time of Iranian revolution, the rise of Gaddafi. So they tried to make alliance with these new forces, giving up the old alliances. Doesn't matter how all these events later took different turns, but for them, these were new hopes and new directions. Even they tried to sort to make alliance with Juche idea of North Korea. I mean, at this moment, I cannot present you the first-hand data because I have been working on them, but because of the corona situation, I don't have enough information. Still, I'm working on the secondary sources. And so what was their ways of doing that? Major Jalil, who was one of the founding members of JSD, he tried to make alliance among Islamist parties and also alliance with Palestine, Libya, and other Islamic forces. And you could see that he visited Iran, and after that, he wrote a poem on Khomeini. Iranian movement has a great influence in on some of them, like many writings were published at that time, Iranian Biplov, and also the compilation of poetry by Ayatollah Khomeini. And Gaddafi's Green Book was very popular at that time. I saw some Bengali copies at that time, but at this moment it is very difficult to find out. So, and a number of youths, they joined the Palestine. These are the people who joined the Palestine Liberation War. Around 8,000 youths, they joined in the 60s and the 70s. Here's a photograph of a prominent filmmaker. He also, and at that time, in the 60s, he was a student of Oxford University, but he joined Palestine Liberation Movement and then came back. And here is a stamp from Bangladesh government who were celebrating the liberation war of Palestine. However, so this of course this didn't last for long. Major Jalil died in 1989 and it didn't get much popularity. So I'll end my discussion here that what had driven them towards this? Consecutive failures of the socialist movements, or the failed revolutions, or the simple realization that, as one of my interlocutors who was a member of JSD and sympathetic to Major Jalil said, the Iranian path is the right path, not for all countries, but for Muslim majority countries like Bangladesh. You cannot unite people denying their embedded religious affiliation. Who saw that these revolutions, the Muslim and socialist movements, could be a threat to the anti-imperialist movement. And at the outer surface, if we are to look at their psyche and look at their motivation, unlike their predecessors of the 1920s to the 40s, who were mostly engaged with the virginity of Marxist theories and theoretical purities, or the predecessors of the 50s and 60s, who had to struggle to locate and validate their position with Bengali nationalism, these young men of 70s were revolutionary. They were dreamers, they were adventurous, but more importantly, they were cosmopolitan in many ways. Many of them were urban middle class or from the even upper class and already exposed to the global connection in many ways, and who could dream of big change. But it is also important to realize that they were not too many of them were engaged theoretically, because they were more looking into the immediate effects of this revolution that gave them the hope. Uh, I didn't see much discussions on, Said Qutb or Hassan al-Banna. Only some of them theoretically tried to relate Islamic socialism like Lenin's NEP or egalitarianism of Abu Ghifari together, Gaddafi's Green Book and Communist Manifesto. But interestingly, they left behind Ubaidullah Sindhi and Azad Subhani, who were the leading political thinkers of their preceding generation. So finally, with the rise of the different trends like neoliberal, that was the prime time of neoliberal economic development also in Bangladesh, along with the rise of Islamic forces, this Islamic socialism appeared to be a dead issue, both for the nationalist, leftist, and Islamic politics. Gaddafi's Green Book and Ali Sharia, they disappeared from the market, although there is a huge boom for Islamist publication in the market. Rarely one can find the economic resolution of Abu Ghifari or Jamaluddin al-Afghani. Rather, they can find some, safe writings of Said Qutb or Subhani, like the biography of Prophet Abu Zakir's biography and so on. So maybe this can be thought to be a kind of the end, but I personally think that they address the very important issue that is still relevant today, the struggle for social justice and democracy and Islam on the one hand, and on the other hand, how to make combination in these both two for the younger generation. Nevertheless, despite all their flaws and everything, the issues are not resolved yet. And perhaps that's the reason for general youth's reluctance to be engaged in politics, who are cosmopolitan in their views, envisioning social justice, but culturally embedded in Islam. And I think, despite all their flaws, the 1970s generation are more better in their thinking because they try to change the world, even if their paths are flawed. So it's more important to look at the case studies that I will be presenting in the final paper. I welcome your suggestions and comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Abantee. That was great. We can now move on to Manfred.
Okay, so it's my turn now. Yeah, thanks, Layli and Simon for having me. It's a great opportunity to speak here to you and to the audience. I like that idea very much. So my talk is so I understand myself as a conceptual historian, so I want to unpack the idea of Islamic socialism. And I come from my background is that I have looked at the communist movement in Arab countries, especially in Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. And I have always wondered why communist thinkers have not really engaged themselves with the Islamic past. And one of the books that has done this has been written by Hossein Mourouwe, the Lebanese thinker, and it appeared in 1978. It's called the Materialist Tendencies in Arab Islamic Philosophy. And I have always wondered why it has appeared in 1978, because this was the time when the Islamic movement was already uh, in move come into its movement, and the Iranian Revolution was already underway. And so I wondered why at that moment. And so now what I recently found out is that a central chapter of this book has already been written in 1970 by Hossein Mourouwe in the literary journal Al-Adab. And this made much more sense to me because this was the immediate context of the failure of Nasserism in Egypt. And Adab ran a lot of articles about Nasserism and the critique of the Egyptian revolution and what went wrong and so on. And the article of Hossein Mourouwe appeared in a special issue called Nahwa Thawra Thaqafiyya, and towards a cultural revolution. And this bears also the overtone of the Chinese cultural revolution, and is somehow directed against Arab socialism and against Soviet communism, if you want to say so. And here, in this context, several thinkers like Hassan Hanafi, Hossein Mourouwe, and Muhammad Nuwayhi, and others, they thought through the idea how a cultural revolution could be possible. And the idea is that um, Arab socialism did not fail only on political reasons, but because they did not address social and cultural issues in a right way. So that's where I come from, and now the question is Islamic socialism. If we so if we want to unpack the concept, so this has several layers. I can distinguish 5 of them. So the first is the relation between Marxism and religion. The second is Marxism and atheism. This is also complicated. So because the relation between Marxism and Christianity, between Marxism and Islam, and between Marxism and atheism, is all of them are different. And then the third question would be, how does the left deal with Islam and Islamic history? The fourth question would be, how do religious and Islamic institutions deal with socialism and communism? And the fifth one is, how do leftist and Islamist political parties and governments deal with each others? And all these things come together when we have a look at the Adab debate and the critique of Arab socialism. So what one can say is that although Marxism or communism, socialism are no religions, and religions are no ideologies, they fulfill or can fulfill similar social functions. They can serve as tools for legitimating revolt as well as oppression, liberation as well as exploitation, armed resistance as well as genocidal violence, if you want so. They are ambivalent systems of thoughts, and they are open for divergent interpretations that can converge, partly intersect, and if can fundamentally clash with each other. Thus, the relations between socialism and Islam can not only be characterized as permanent ups and downs, but there are also different views held by different people about Marxism, socialism, Islam, and religion. So the relation between Marxism and Islam appears obviously different from in the logic of state policies, in the logic of religious authorities, party organizations. They are differently analyzed by politicians, religion scholars, and intellectuals. And all of this depends on where these people stand on the power position, how they view the state apparatus, and how their attitude is towards Marxism and the critique of the role of religion in society. And if we put this together, so in a general sense, there are 4 phases where all of these strands have been discussed. So the phase before World War One, when the first ideas of socialist thinking were adopted in the Arab world, basically anarchist thinkers. The interwar period where communist parties spread because of the Soviet impact, the Cold War, when they played when communist parties played a role in cooperating with basically with Arab socialist parties, and then the post-Cold War period where a younger generation has recently taken um, um, up neo-Marxist ideas, if you want. So and in these 4 phases, there have always also been um, uh, uh, um, sort of opportunities for alliances. Although communism has been deemed un-Islamic by many Muslim scholars, Marx-inspired socialist thought has been combined with nationalism and political Islam, for example, during Nasserism, during the Iranian Revolution, and also in the Arab uprisings in 2011. In these moments, this combination of thoughts has inspired the masses, and and it has adopted religious overtones beyond a narrow Islamic sense, rather representing a utopia in the making. As Ernst Bloch once said, where there is hope, there is religion. So when I come then to the adab debate and the historic critical approach of these thinkers, one could add where there is desperation, there is critique of religion. And this kind of critique was exercised then by Hussein Mourouve in his introduction. He says what the Arab socialists did in Egypt and elsewhere is that they made an idealist um, that they followed an idealist approach to the Islamic heritage, and they only picked out the positive sides and exaggerated them. And what was needed was a really revolutionary interpretation of the past. So that was what he's doing. That's what he has said, and now from there, I want to zoom in on the different understandings of socialism. So this kind of communist critique that he um, voiced, I want to um, add at least four other understandings of socialisms. So the one is how the Azhar dealt with socialism. So they basically made fatwas against communism, but they supported uh, Arab socialism. Then there are um, Islamic thinkers that try to reclaim socialism. So, uh, like Sayyid Qutb has been mentioned now several times in our sessions. And then I want to have a look at Arab socialism and what Nasser said and what the intellectuals said that supported Arab socialism. And then I also want to have a look at how Azhar scholars supported Arab socialism. So starting with the fatwas, one can say that there has been several fatwas by the Azhar against communism, and they are basically based on the idea that atheism is not compatible with Islam, and that atheism is a central the central point of communism, and therefore it is not possible to acquiesce to it. And in 1965 there was the famous fatwa where the Azhar committee said that it is not allowed for a Muslim woman or a Muslim man to marry a communist, because um, they said because that is contra to the Islamic doctrine, and in because communism is a cohesive ideology, they said, and now I quote, while Islam did not permit a Muslim woman to marry someone from among the people of the books, Christians and Jews, although they believe in God, his books, his prophets, and the last day in general, then why would it allow a Muslimah to marry someone who does neither believe in divinity, nor prophecy, nor resurrection and judgment? So, end of quote. Um, so there are in the 70s there were other fatwas also that called student demonstrators unbelievers, and the state mufti Abdelhamid Mahmoud explained that communism is kufr, impiety, and those who support it have no faith. And and he says that a communist who pretends to be a Muslim should be considered a munafiq, a hypocrite. And he also said they take the book of Marx for the Quran, Marx for their prophet, and communism for their religion. So, and that's what they said about communism. And in spite of this clear opposition, the funny thing is that at that time, Nasserist Egypt was allied with the Soviet Union, and it introduced, so it made a socialist turn, and it pledged itself to socialism. So there, the second current is therefore that is opposed to this. Also to communism, but it wants to reclaim socialism in an Islamic way. That is to say, the idea of socialism, social justice, has been spread across the whole political scene, and so Muslims tried from early on to reclaim it for themselves, like Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, who talked about the tadamun, solidarity in Islam, so it could about social justice, adala al-ijtimaiyyah, and Mustafa Sibai, the Muslim brother from Syria, about takaful, and also solidarity. And this was a major trend, and one of the persons, it was one of the Islamic figures that has often been used for this is Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, and Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani already mentioned him, but the first book that appeared on him was written by a Sunni author, Abd al-Hamid Judah al-Sahar, in 1943, with a foreword by Hassan al-Banna, and he called him the Ishtiraki Zahid, the ascetic socialist. And this book was later then translated into Persia and appeared there with a foreword by Ali Shariati. And this appeared at nearly the same time when the Azhar opposed in another fatwa a book, the appearance of a book that claimed that Abu Dhar was a communist. So while it was possible to reclaim Abu Dhar as an early socialist, it was impossible to claim that it was possible to reclaim him as a Islamic socialist, so to say. So what, for example, Mustafa Sibai, the Muslim brother from Syria, and the dean of the Sharia faculty in Damascus, wrote in his book Ishtirakiyat al-Islam, the Socialism of Islam, in 1959, was that Islamic socialism must not be confused neither with socialist nor communist ideas, since it's broadened the concept of socialism, and it included all material and moral aspects of life. And then he enumerated 10 types of takaful, mutual social responsibility, so to say, 10 types of takaful in Islam, and 29 laws that regulated its application. And on this sort of ideas, Arab socialists built also their ideas. Nasser more than once mentioned in his speeches that Muhammad was the first socialist, and he so he said that Islamic or Arab socialism is a pragmatic socialism that is not based on a rigid dogma like the Soviet socialism, and much to the dismay of the much to the dismay of the Soviets, who tried to lecture him on socialism, and they tried to convince him to release imprisoned communists, and to understand that class struggle was a central concept of socialism. But Nasser said that not only that that uh, he laid claim to scientific socialism, but he said this is not a materialist or a Marxist socialism. He said also, a quote, "We did not say that we departed from religion, but we said that our religion is a socialist religion and that Islam in the Middle Ages fulfilled the first socialist experiment in the world." So, end of quote. And on this basis, loyal intellectuals wrote a series of book series about early Islamic figures like Mahmoud Shalabi, the writer Mahmoud Shalabi. He wrote on the socialism as practiced by Muhammad, his wife Khadija, about Abu Dhar once again, about the caliphs Abu Bakr, Omar, and Osman. And he tried to demonstrate that there is an independent socialism springing from our history, that's a quote, springing from our history, our beliefs, and our nature. The playwright Abdurrahman Sharkawi in the same time depicted Hussein bin Ali as a revolutionary and also Muhammad as the prophet of freedom, so the title of his book. And the writer Ahmed Abbas Saleh was the editor of the Nasserist journal Al Katib. He described the struggle between the right and left and the struggle for social justice as a continuous trend since early Islam. So this just a few examples from this sort of books, and yet Ashar would have maybe not accepted these ideas, but at the same time, when Nasser made that turn to socialism, he also nationalized the Azhar, and um, and um, um, with the law in 1961, and this led to a total reorganization of the whole Azhar, and the staff was reshuffled, and the funding was risen. There was much more money and much more international exchange, and and there was a press campaign criticizing traditional religiosity, so that even the Sheikh al-Assad at that time, Mahmoud Shaltut, publicly admitted that the ulama had to live for the sake of Islam and not by means of it. And the Azhar journal said that the ulama should inculcate the new revolutionary thought and teach Islamic socialism to the masses. And they took then up the term takaful. Shaltut did it, and also a more traditional scholar like Muhammad al-Bahi. And they depicted Islam as the religion of socialism. And what these shuyukh then argued for was that the state is allowed to become a command system worthy of obedience insofar as those in command are rightly guided, and as long as the property is guarded by all for the benefit of all, as Shaltut once remarked. And with their secular counterparts, these religious scholars shared an optimism or even a sort of naivety about the benefits of state power and administrative efficiency. And they tried to present this kind of Islamic socialism as a third way beyond beyond communism and capitalism, and and finally they legitimized absolute authority of the state with utilitarian arguments. So they succumbed to state socialism, although they had argued against the danger of materialist philosophies uh, in a communist or capitalist way, and they tried to invoke the socialism of Islam against materialism, but what they did practically was that they legitimized state authoritarianism. Um, there were actually um, um, also critical voices, and the most important was the one by Sayyid Qutb, who had earlier written about, that's true, in the 50s, about the Islamic, about the social justice in Islam, but he became totally critical of the Nasserist regime, and he then wrote that that there was the third way should not be um, um, neither, so that so he said that the Nasserist state is not the third way, and said that if the scholars justified state activities with reference to public interest and Islamic values, they merely represented a modern form of ideolatry. So that's why he opposed to it, and he was then also executed, as is well known. So what one can say then from this short review of Arab socialism is that the authoritarian character of the Arab socialist regimes not only divided Islamic intellectuals but also the leftist ones, and both groups came after Arab socialism came to revise their support, and that's where the adab debate then comes in, and what they try to say there. So is to review their own support and their own bad experience. So with Nasserism. So my final point is to conclude this thought. So um, why did Islamic intellectuals and why did leftist intellectuals support Arab socialism and authoritarian states and corporate state models? So um, one could say this was the authoritarian bargain. So the people thought that the state went partly in their direction and that they could support it. So they had to give something, and they might take more. So, but after the failure of Nasserism, they came to critically refute their earlier support, and that there is a large the bookshelves are full of formerly of supporters or of disappointed supporters of Nasserism, especially on the Arab, from the Arab left. So what the Adab debate then shows is that they focus their critique on society and culture, and they do not state that directly, but what I would argue from my impression of what I read from these articles, they sort of said um, uh, the Arab socialist state should have re-educated the masses, and it should have rebuilt popular culture in the same way as the Chinese Cultural Revolution did it. Okay, or according to the image that the Arab left had from the Chinese Cultural Revolution. So this is then not it was partly a critique of the authoritarian character of Arab socialism, but it was also it also had authoritarian other authoritarian trends. So it said that the state failed to rebuild the cultural and the social society in it completely. So the Nasserist state only restricted itself to politics and economy. So for anti-authoritarian politics, we have to wait on the left. We have to wait until the 1990s, and this is also clear if we once again if we put it in a broader frame. We can also say that what we see is that this is also this struggle about Arab socialism and so on is also part of the Cold War, and this changed after the Cold War. So um, during the Cold War, so this is my last point to wrap it up and lead it to and come also to today. During the Cold War, US Americans as well as the Soviets competed with each other to win the hearts and minds of Muslims. So the Soviets continued their anti-colonial efforts and sent ambassadors from Central Asia all around the world until their strategy to help Muslims suffered shipwreck with the intervention in Afghanistan. The US administration since Truman forged an anti-communist alliance with the Vatican and with other religious groups, and with their growing global role, tried to expand anti-communism that was underpinned with Christian values into a global religious movement against the Soviets and their allies. These efforts contributed to a significant religious dimension of the Cold War. And in the attempt to contain Soviet influence, US foreign policy also relied on Islamic anti-communism, for which the anti-communist fatwas are a telling example. The US policy failure, exemplified by the Iranian Revolution, and Al-Qaeda's turn on the West, has resulted in an atmosphere of cultural struggle against Islam in Western society that is at least partly partly recalls the earlier Soviet cultural struggle against everything religious. In spite of the shifting political grounds, Marxists and anti-Marxists have always been keen to politically stand on the right side. In this respect, the difference between atheism and religion, or between socialism and Islam, has always functioned as a marker for pro and anti-communism. Dissidents like third worldists or like Bloch called into questions such as stereotypical boundary drawing in the especially in the Cold War period. And with the end of the Cold War, the markers of atheism and religion has lost their politically defining meaning to a considerable degree, which is visible in the recent confrontation between Marxists and new atheists, or in interaction between leftists and Muslims. And this also makes open the space for new cooperation between Islamic and socialist forces. At the same time, it has yet not become easier to decide where the right side for the left lies. This is visible in nearly every controversial issue connected with Islam, from headscarf to political violence, which divides different groups on the left. The only form of consensus on which the left is able to agree today is that rightist populist movements want to capitalize on Islamophobia. Therefore, there is no united global left with a common language in the making, and the moral condemnation of economic exploitation that is often today shared by religious institutions, from the Pope to the Azhar, expresses no utopian consensus. because from a Marxian viewpoint, moral condemnations leave everything untouched and affirms the status quo. So it is based on the same norms and laws that have helped to develop the present situation, which are nevertheless morally condemned but not changed. And moral condemnation in secular or religious guise is part of the inverted world that Marx wanted to overthrow. So having said this, the Marxist discord in their search for global unity with themselves and with Muslims, a plurality in unity should not be, I think, seen as a major weakness, but as an inevitable outcome of their aspirations to change the world, something all too familiar to change the world and to understand the world, something all too familiar for theologians. So Ernst Bloch once wrote, the best thing, so quote, the best thing about religion is that it makes for heretics. And so the same can be said for Marxism and socialist thought, that the best thing is that it also makes heretics. So, and if Islam, if Muslims and socialists want to join forces, and that's what they do then and now. So the slogan may be heretics welcome. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thank you, Manfred and Abantee. I think Abantee is still there. Yes, great. Okay. Before we go to questions and answers from the audience itself, Simon and I do have questions to kick it off for each of the speakers. Simon, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I have a question that also touches on another question that has been raised via the chat by Anar Amin, who was curious to hear a little bit more on the Green Book, Abantee, that you talked about and its influence and its ideas in Bangladesh. And I would like to piggyback on this question and also to maybe ask Manfred in this regard, since this was envisioned by Gaddafi as sort of his own synthesis of Islam and socialism and other things. To what extent did this ever attract an audience beyond Libya itself? You know, was this ever taken, can we say that this was ever taken seriously in other quarters of the Arab world and beyond? So this would be my first question that maybe both of you could address. And my second question is in particular directed to Manfred, since you mentioned that basically also the Islamic socialists fell into this authoritarian temptation, or they thought they could engage in this authoritarian bargain, as you said. Later on, has there ever been a reckoning that this was maybe a strategy that really backfired, or that this, you know, how they perceive the state, that there also needs to be a rethinking that this line of action or this line of thought really led into maybe a cul-de-sac that with all its consequences? So this would be my question for the two of you.
I'll ask my question and then we can move on to the answers. Okay, so really, so Abantee, I was just wondering if you could think more, more about the failures of Islamic socialism in Bangladesh. And when we're thinking about Maulana Bashani and his connection to his particular constituencies and the spaces that he was operating in, I'm wondering who Major Jalil's constituencies are. Like, who are they trying to mobilize? What is the language? Can we think about the failures in terms of the constituencies in terms of the constituencies that they're trying to mobilize? And also their somewhat a failure of language. Do they have the language to speak to those constituencies? Do they have those relationships? What were they doing prior to this? So that's for Abantee. And I mean, maybe, and Manfred, it's really just in terms of thinking about Abu Dhar al-Ghifari, because he was coming, this is a figure that we've spoken about throughout the rest of over the last few days. And he's appearing in sort of Indonesia, Iran, and all others. And I'm just wondering if there's different iterations of what is being said about Abu Dharr al-Ghifari? What are the sort of the stories that are being said? Are they quite different from each other? And are there present day, I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I'm wondering if there are present day conversations about Abu Dharr al-Ghifari. Are we seeing different readings? Like, what are the readings around Abu Dharr al-Ghifari? That's my question for you.
Okay. Should I answer first?
Yes.
Okay. So the question about the Green Book, well, it was the time of the late 70s when the consecutive military rulers, in part of their legitimacy-seeking process, tried to make alliance with the Arab forces, Arab countries. And in doing so, they had to make alliance with Middle Eastern countries and also Libya and others. And also at the same time, a number of migrants started to move towards Arab countries as laborers. So perhaps new alliances were made, not only during the military rulers, but also we could see that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who were initially rejected by the Arab world, I mean most of the Muslim countries, he also joined the YC summit, and there we could see that he was having close and intimate moments with the Arab leaders, and Gaddafi was also there. So, however, the relationship was established with the Arab countries and especially with Libya, and Gaddafi was seen at that time as a hero who was kind of a hero against anti-imperialism, kind of capitalism, and a kind of hero or messiah for the newly liberated Muslim countries. So I don't know how, but the Green Book was translated into Bengali at that time, possibly by the Libyan embassy, and it was widely circulated at that time. But I really wonder how many of the followers of that time, they really went through the Gaddafi's book. I think it's more about his charisma. I asked many of my interlocutors that which path you think it was right, whether the Gaddafi's path or the Iranian path or any other thing you were thinking of. It was not very clear to them theoretically that they could make the differentiation among these different schoolings. So I thought that it's not very, Gaddafi was more like a charismatic figure, not the Green Book. Green Book was like more trendy item among them. So they used to read Green Book, but not to internalize. And that also takes to the question that you asked, Layli asked, that who were they to mobilize? Actually, if when it is often said that is the failure of the most of the communist movements in Bangladesh, there are different schoolings, that the language they spoke is the language of actually the urban middle class educated group, except Maulana Bhashani, who spoke for the peasantry. And in this case especially, these were the urban, very educated and outward looking youths who were looking outward, who were looking global. And that was partly the failure because they had immense support immediately after the liberation war, where the people were frustrated with the ruling party. But I think the language they spoke could not reach the mass people. And also, they were so confident in their idea of socialism or the scientific socialism they were promoting. They rarely focused on creating people organization. Only like in the still Bangladesh is mostly peasant based or the common people, so they could not reach there. And when they adopted Islamic socialism, that was mostly outward looking, not inward looking. They did not took from the local frames of Islamism. Therefore, I say that they refused not refute, but they didn't look at the already existing Islamic theologians like Ubaidullah Sindi or Azad Subhani. They didn't look at those. They looked at Gaddafi. They looked at Iranian Revolution. So surely there was a failure of language and idioms that could not reach the masses. Otherwise, the point identified, the question of religion, the question of Islam, is very important, but it never reached the people.
Great, thank you. Manfred.
Yeah, thanks for your questions. On the Green Book, I am no expert, but my impression is that I also would say that it was not taken so serious by the left or by Muslims. Although it was certainly read to an extent. My impression is that Gaddafi's role comes more over his economic power, and that he financed many movements in the Middle East with the oil money, and from that point. So, for example, I read that he sort of forced the communists in Lebanon during he financed them during the war, during the civil war in the 70s, in the late 70s. And then he sort of forced them to come to Libya and sort of make a pilgrimage to him, and he certainly also lectured him about them about his ideas, but I think it was more the financial support that attracted people. His ideas, you know, he held in a Beiruti newspaper. He gave an interview and said that um, I can't remember exactly the wording, but he said that an Arab can only be a Muslim, or a Muslim can only be an Arab, or something like this. An Arab must be a Muslim or so. Yeah, and so this uh, was not um, was not uh, very that found no good resonance among the Lebanese communists, because many of them were from came from a Christian background, and so this sort of combining the two so essentially, so to say, not as in an idea, you know, you don't. Did not say we have to combine Islamic thought and Marxist thought. No, he talked about the people and about your convictions, and so, and this was not so. This was controversial, to say the least, I guess. Yeah, about the authoritarian bargain and the Islamist reckoning afterwards. Um, I think the main point is that uh, there was a great bunch of Muslim brothers who said that Sayyid Qutb was right from the beginning in his critique of Nasser, and the concept of Hakimiyya, God sovereignty. So they posed God sovereignty against the state sovereignty, and said the state is so the idea that the state is an idol is represents kufr, and so on. I guess this whole ideas, or yeah, they were strengthened through the authoritarian experience, not only in Egypt but also in Syria and so on. You know, the many Muslim prisoners in the prisons were treated very badly, and are treated badly until today. So that that's not only a question of ideas, but also of experiences, life experiences. About Abu Dhar, yeah, there are very different stories told with this name. So what I left out in my presentation is that there were also adamant opponents of communism, and they said communism is a pre-Islamic and anti-Islamic idea. So pre-Islamic because they said it comes from Mazdagism, so a Zoroastrian a Zoroastrian sect in the 5th century, and anti-Islamic because it was spread by non-Arab groups, in early Islamic history, the Shias, but also the Jews are here often mentioned. And Ahmed Amin, one of the important Egyptian scholars who wrote a three-part history on early Islam in the 30s, he connected Abu Dhar, the ideas of Abu Dhar, with Masdak, and also with the imaginary Jewish convert Ibn Saba. And so he made this connection to connect Abu Dhar's thinking with the pre-Islamic and with the Jewish conspiracy. So there you have this mixture that has then become more relevant after 1948, that Bolshevism is a Zionist Jewish conspiracy, so to say. That can also be told, this story can also be told with Abu Dhar, obviously. Yeah, and the Azhar in their fatwa about the book that was prevented from distribution in 1948, they said Abu Dhar had only one opinion, that Muslims should not collect wealth, and this was already discussed and renounced during his lifetime. So we should not follow him. So that was the text of the fatwa at that time. In the 70s was what the state mufti Mahmoud said. He wrote also a book on Abu Dhar, and he said he was just an upright, ordinary Muslim and no socialist at all. So this is a figure, you know, the sources are dim, and you can place a lot of stories in sort of in this figure, you know, because because we don't have a complete life story of him in the original sources, so to say, and what is then written about him is reinvention of tradition in the 19th, 20th century.
Okay, great, thanks. We have two questions from, I think there's two people who want to ask questions, Sarah Tonsi and Mirifat Salahin. So should we get Sarah to ask her question first, and then we'll go to Mir? Sarah, are you there?
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, my questions are, first of all, thank you for organizing this panel. My questions are for Singh. My first question is about how Sadat used the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Azhar, and it's becoming a state institution, to repress the left in Egypt. The second question is about how in recent years, after the uprising, the 2011 uprisings, there were lots of ex-Muslim Brotherhood members who actually disengaged from the movement in order to join more socialist, more leftist, even socialist Islamist parties. The last question is about how there were several leftist or socialist political parties in Egypt since the Sadat era, and how they were in constant disagreement with the Muslim Brotherhood and other Islamist organizations, and how this reflected on society, or how it reflected on the public's perception of the left. Thank you.
Great. Whilst we give Manfred time to think, we'll take the questions from Rifat. Rifat, are you there?
Yeah, hi. So my question is about Islamic socialism in Bangladesh. So I was wondering that recently, if we see the student protests or movements in Bangladesh, students from madrasa have been playing quite a major role, and they are still doing it. And if I'm not wrong, one is going on right now. So I was wondering that in in their politics or in their praxis, do students of madrasa look upon these figures like M.A. Jalil or Maulana Bhashani? Or do you think there is a scope where these ideologies or these figures will be articulated into their political thinking? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Either Abantee or Manfred, do you want to go?
Yeah, I start with 3 questions by Sarah, but actually I forgot the third question. I start with the first one. That Sadat used the Asa and the Muslim Brotherhood in his attempt to fight against the left. I think this is well known. I cannot add very much to that at this point. This is just more or less, that's a known fact, I guess. The second question was about the uprising and the movement of former Muslim brothers to the socialist camp. So this is also not totally new. We have this kind of alliances and movement since the 1990s seen in different countries, and Michael Brauers has written a book about that. About the post-uprising movement between the camps, this is mostly applies mostly to the younger generation of the Muslim brothers, I would say, that turned to a more socialist outlook. I've heard about that from several activists, leftist activists in Egypt, but I don't know any numbers about that, so I cannot say this. So this was a current talk or maybe a wishful thinking after the uprising, but I cannot say anything with precision about the numbers also. And the third question, as I said, this was something about Egypt. I forgot simply the question, and I hope I have answered the other two.
We can go back to Sarah afterwards, if just to get that third question. But why don't we let Abantee answer hers? I think you need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for the question. It's about the madrasa students and madrasa issues. Well, madrasa is a very complicated phenomenon. We cannot define the madrasa students once again as a homogeneous category. Many of the early leaders, like Muzaffar Ahmad himself, who was the founding figure of communist movement, came from madrasa. Maulana Bhashani, he studied in madrasa. So madrasa of that time had a quite different character than the madrasas that proliferated during the 70s. Because in the 70s, a number of madrasas were established. In fact, so many madrasas were established with the direct assistance from the Middle Eastern countries or by the immigrants, the migrants who came back from Middle Eastern countries. So they had a particular agenda to serve. So how these people look at Islamic socialism? First of all, I would like to say that in 1980s, a number of madrasa people joined the Afghan war to fight with the Mujahideen. So they fought against the Soviet force. So for them, the immediate enemy was the communist. So that actually contributed to the common understanding of the communists as the enemies for Islam first. And later on, as I said, that there was a huge rise of Salafist movement and Salafist ideologies in Bangladesh, for which reason many writers started to write against socialism. For example, popular writers like Taqi Usmani, whose books had been translated to Bengali, wrote extensively against socialism, why Islamists should oppose socialism. And the others, like if you ask about the Islamic socialism in Bangladesh, like Major Jalil and others, they never wanted to reach the madrasa student. At least they were very short-lived, but still there was no attempt was seen to reach the madrasa people. But some students from madrasa, they joined, and they had some kind of soft corner. And still there are some madrasa graduates and teachers whom I found that who are part of even the Communist Party, but they are part of the Communist Party Bangladesh, CPP, not of Jashid as per se. But in general, the feeling is anti-socialism. If you ask them, despite all this, capitalist aggression, neoliberal economic flourishment, if you ask any of the madrasa students, for them, communism or socialism is the major enemy. They define that because of socialism, there is a least scope to develop, to create a scope for individual development. So, in general, there is a disliking. And as if you look at theoretically, I didn't find many people who had been through Said Qutb or Hassan al-Banna or Abu Bakr, no, not there. Rather, they look at other Islamic scholars like Taqi Usmani or, recent, Said Qutb is also there, but not his political or economic thinkings, like his, ideal thinkings for Islam, how to become a good Muslim, or something like, how Islamic revolution should be made, but not about Islamic socialism. And at this moment, as you say, the movements are going on. I mean, there were several uprisings, but these were mostly led by immediate issues of justice or their discontents. They are rarely based on any Islamic or socialist ideological thought. So you can talk about the Hifazat Islami, their movement, but I think there you could hardly find any, particular Islamic political thought. I mean, they wanted to establish, some sort of Islamic statehood or Islamic political system, but it was not very clear. If you ask that what kind of Islamic state would you like to, they won't. Only a few will mention to the Medina Charter, but rarely they would refer to other political thoughts. So I think that's not very prominent, or at least I didn't find any of my respondents to talk about that.
Okay, great. So we'll take 3 more questions, and actually, so we have a written question from Johan, and that's for both Abantee and Manfred. So the question for Abantee is that you mentioned the marginalization of the Islamic socialist forces in the 70s after its height in the 1960s with Bashani. How do you account for this change? Is it a result of the war itself on Islamic Islamic politics, or were there particular issues faced by Bashani? So what explains the decline of the Islamic socialist sort of politics of Islamic socialism? Is it Bashani, or is it something else, or is it the war? And for Manfred, could you please speak a little about the position of Islamic socialism within Al-Azhar from Sadat to Sisi? So you might, and then also, does Saudi Arabia and the Islamic University of Medina continue to wage intellectual battle against Islamic socialism, or do they no longer find it necessary? So whilst you're thinking about those questions, we'll take, I think Luke wanted to ask a question. Luke, do you want to?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I have a similar question to what I asked yesterday, which is, so Shiite imams and their followers in the past were frequently the fighters against oppression, such as Hussein against Yazid at Karbala. And this could be seen as making them, I don't know, revolutionary in a sense. So do you think this makes it easier for Shiites to propagate Islamic socialism than Sunnis, who have a history of being perhaps more generally allied with the ruling Muslim powers? And do you think that could cause tension between the two? And that's for Manfred.
Okay, great. Sarah had to leave, so we don't have we don't have someone else asking questions. So, Abantee, do you want to go first?
Okay, the question I was asked, I think you can answer much better than me because you worked on Bajani. So, okay, from my understanding of that time, I think there were many factors. One factor is that there were some strategic decision making and some faults. Islam at that was a time of the rise of Bengali nationalism, and the Bengali nationalist politics led by Awami League and their alliances almost took over all other politics at that time, even the CPP or the Communist Party or a part of Maulana Bhashani's group. They supported the Awami agenda. So that's how it got dismantled, and also the split in Bhashani in Bhashani's own party, like pro-Marxist-Leninist line and also the pro-Chinese line, also kind of contributed to this fall. And later on, I think if we look at their role in the Baba in the post-liberation time, I think that by the time Bhashani lost all his alliances and his idea of Rabubiyat was mainly meant for the peasants. And the peasants who thought that they found their voice in the liberation war, maybe they didn't felt much attracted to him anymore. But of course, that could be revisited once again. And these urban people who I was talking about, for them, actually, Islam was only another frame, another adventure to conduct revolution. It's not that, I mean, that's what I have been working on in their regular life. Were they very Islamic in their life of piety and practice? I don't think so, not too many of them. So, in their personal belief, were they very Islamist? Well, that's not very easy question to answer, but I don't think they were trying to reach the people the way Maulana Bhashani wanted to reach. So maybe that was the cause of their failure too. And they never thought of making alliance with Maulana Bhashani too, or Bhashani's ideology. So there were many factors, but perhaps there was a kind of departure from the peasantry towards urban youth. So maybe that could be identified as the fall of Islamic socialism.
Okay, thank you. Manfred. So Manfred, it's over to you.
Well, yeah. My mistake. If you want to say something, you have to switch on the mic. So.
Yes.
Yeah. So thanks a lot for these questions. I actually cannot say much about Islamic socialism within Al-Azhar after Sadat to Sisi. So that's beyond my scope. So I'm sorry about that. So yeah, I would, from what I read, so that's the only impression. So that's not well founded. But my impression is that Muslim thinkers generally left the idea of an Islamic socialist state aside after the 70s. So they left this idea totally, and they focused on a sort of in different varieties on a sort of Islamic, yeah, Islamic market economy, and in different varieties, even neoliberal versions, and even people who connect being a devout Muslim with economic success, so to say. So also in a rather individualized form, and there are several studies on preachers who represent these kind of ideas. And so I would say that this is no longer present as a current in Al-Azhar, although I would not totally exclude that maybe the one or the other sheikh still holds such ideas, but I don't know it. So I'm sorry about that. About Saudi Arabia, I can say at least that so the question was, does Saudi Arabia still battle Islamic socialism? And so what I can say that I only recently met a book about, I encountered a book that was published recently where everything is called communist and kufr that has something to do with leftist thought. So this is so still yeah, an easy target, I guess, for scholars or intellectuals from Saudi Arabia, I would say. Then the third question is about the Shia and Islamic socialism. So yeah, this is a tricky question because there was, you know, certainly the slogan Shi'i Shuyu'i in Arabic. So Shi'id is a communist, so it is a play on words. However, this play on words was not meant as a compliment, but it was um, um, invented as a denigrating remark. So that in the sense that the Shiites, they deviate from the right path, so to say, and that it's no accident that they are becoming communists. So that was a slogan that was rather widespread, I guess, already in the 30s, but certainly in the 40s and 50s. Yeah, and because of this, so what speaks to your point? Yeah, Hussein is one point, but even Abu Dar al-Ghifari is also would be a case in point, because from the Shiite point of view, Abu Dar al-Ghifari is one of the few companions of the Prophet who supported Hussein, who supported Ali, and so he is part of the Shi'i. Also, he is part of the Shi'i universum, so to say. However, the debate in the Shi'i community in the 20th century was rather controversial on this point, because in most countries the Shia was in the minority, and they tried to gain equal rights and equal representation and so on. And so they tried to avoid, so many of them tried to avoid to appear as revolutionaries or as communists or as allies of a foreign force, so to say. And they tried to say that they represent an authentic Islamic an authentic Islamic position, and not something outside of it. So this was controversial inside the Shi'i community, because people said we don't have to appear as community, so it's not good to be too closely connected with communism, that has always the rumor to be connected to foreign forces, to other interests, and so on. So yeah, the short answer to your question is yes and no. So both of it. Yes, the Shiites have certainly historically, and if they think about suppression and revolution, so this is maybe easier for them to connect it in a modern way sense to modern revolutions. On the other hand, in the modern contexts where these ideas have been debated, this has always been controversial and politically loaded, so to say.
Okay. Thank you very much for taking the time. Thank you for all your questions. And of course, a special thank to you, Abantee and Manfred, for your presentations and for staying with us. We have a last iteration of our webinar series tomorrow at 6 p.m. British Summer Time. So please note the time difference, 4 hours later than today. And we will be staying in North Africa and discussing Algeria and Sudan with Miriam Davis of UC Santa Cruz and Willow Barrage of Newcastle University. Thanks for your interest, and see you soon.